I'm actually here in the Tesla showroom, and I have a friend, and I think the best person is to ask him for
Sure.
comment.
Oh,
Can you tell us
hi.
about what you did yesterday and what's actually going on in the training? Okay, so I'm just going to put it up there. John, you know what? I think I have as much a chance of getting a comment out of him as you do to actually having Elon commit to a date for you.
Touche. Touche. Hey, y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I know that Scott and I just did a video yesterday, but, Tesla has this habit of dropping videos on Saturday evenings that require us to suddenly convene. And Scott is out and about and is in Orlando at a Tesla showroom. And I hear you're going to be speaking to a couple hundred people possibly. So that's really cool. And also Scott and I have matching shirts. Mine is white, his is black. So very cool. Welcome, Scott. And thank you so much for being here in the middle of your busy day. What do you got for us today? Let's talk about this video.
I got this guy.
All right.
Here.
There we go.
So this is an Opticon.
Yes.
And the thing about Opticons is they are a faithful replication of the Optimus robot. So we're going to understand mechanically how it works, what the construction techniques are like, and how it's going to move. But yesterday, we get to see quite a bit about Optimus and what it's actually able to do now as far as teaching. And that was like less than a 2-minute video.
Right.
There was a lot of information in there, and you have to look at it again and again and again. And Cern Basher and I have looked at it probably a couple dozen times at this point, and looking at all the nuance of what it's doing. And it's pretty amazing from that video. I mean, the first thing is the calibration to get the proprioception.
Right.
And then the activities of picking up the blocks and moving around, even though they're moving around. And there are a few things that more people have picked up on that we've noticed posted on X, but there may be a couple other subtle points that have not been elaborated on and that we can try to dive into.
Cool. All right. Well, without further ado, let me go ahead and share the video, and then we will, if I can find it, of course. It's always the trick on this. I've got too many windows open. All right. Can you see that? Are we good? I know it's just a circle right now, but
right. Yeah, okay. I can't quite see it yet. Yes. Okay. So what we're seeing is that Optimus is going through a calibration phase.
Right.
And this is something very common with the robot. Sometimes this is what they would call a mastering phase of a robot. So you have an ideal model of what your robot is supposed to look like, and then you have to build it. And when you build it, there are construction errors that are in it. And a lot of it might be how long a certain arm is, and you need to be able to measure those some. And so you can go out with a bunch of calipers and measure those things, or you can actually exercise the bot anyway.
Right.
And so the exercising of the bot is one way to be able to grab that information if you have a good measurement system like cameras that can do tracking.
Right.
So you take that and you fit it into your model to try to find out exactly where it is. Now, a lot of industrial robots do go through this, where they are moved around, and then you're able to calculate what are the parameters for that particular arm. And the one parameter, which is the biggest one, are the encoders. So the encoders are what measures the joint angles. And so the joint angles determine kind of the configuration of the arms. So is the elbow at 0 degrees or is it 90 degrees? You need to measure it. And that means built into the actuator are these encoders that will tell you that. Now, the encoders may be relative or absolute. I assume these have some sort of absolute setting, but they can kind of lose their position. And the way to think about it is if you make a watch, a mechanical watch, and you set the hands to be exactly at midnight, and then you put a watch on there, but you're really sloppy in the watch face, and you put like 3 o'clock pointing up at midnight. That means the watch is giving the wrong time because the face is misaligned. So you need to find where's the true zero for that. And so you would kind of move the watch face around and say, oh, it's off by 90 degrees. The encoders are the same thing, is that when they configure this thing, it doesn't really know where the zero reference is, and you're trying to get it. So that is usually the largest source of error in an arm, is trying to figure out where the actual zero is for the encoders. And that's what they mean by the joint values and the joint encoders. Encoders is just a fancy word for a protractor, which is able to measure the angle. So once you have that, now you can match that to the actual internal model, which they call like the full kinematic model. If you tell me what the joint values are, I can tell you where the end of the arm should be. And I can
Right.
see if that matches what I am seeing with my cameras. So
Right.
that means the cameras have to give you a Cartesian position that you match up and you say, are they in sync? And if they aren't in sync, what do I have to tweak and change in those offsets to get them to eventually align? And this
Right.
is no different than anyone who does target practice. They know you're going to set your scope to match the target. So the first thing you do is you shoot at the target, and you realize that you're off a little bit in one direction, and then you compensate the scope to be able to dial it in.
Right.
So it's the same thing that's going on. And it's very important for the proprioception. And in
Yes.
theory, what this means is that, and I don't know if we just switch back to our cameras for a second. I don't know if you can see me.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on a sec. There we go.
Yep. I've done this many times, and the whole idea of proprioception is I'm so aware of my body and where everything is, and like the joint angles of my elbow and my wrist and even my fingers. I can close my eyes, and yes, my eyes are closed right now, and I can take my finger and go around and touch my nose. And then I can decide, do it with my thumb instead or do it with my pinky. And I'm doing all that because I have an internalized model of my body that tells me where everything is. It's a lot easier when I have a camera, because if I'm really tired in the morning, let's say I haven't recalibrated myself when I get up in the morning, then I might like, oh, wait a minute, I'm off. But if I'm able to see what's going on, I can see, whoa, my finger is going right where I want it to be.
Right.
So that's what you're doing.
So I will actually interject. Just this morning, I had that experience. I had just woken up, hadn't opened my eyes up, and my wrist itched, and I went to scratch it, and I scratched the air. It was like miscalibration.
Yeah. Now this calibration could be a mastering process they have to do when they first build the Optimus and put it together. That's going to be very important. The question is whether it's a kind of a daily routine, because sometimes these encoders can float. They can move around, or there could be other things, or you bump into something and suddenly something gets a little bit out of whack. And it could also be that when you power it down and start it up, it loses its reference position. There are a lot of things which will do that. They will lose the encoder reference if they aren't holding on to it. So that's always a possibility of what's going to be going on. So the encoders are basically things that are built in to these actuators. That's going to tell us what the rotational angle is here and there. Now, sometimes it gets a little bit tricky. If you look at this mechanism here, what we want to know, and hopefully you can see my finger right now.
Yeah, I can see it.
As you can see, that's a pin joint right there. That's the pin joint that makes the wrist move. That is basically the angle you would like to know. But that angle of motion is caused by the length that this thing moves. So this encoder basically is giving you an encoder a count of revolutions. And from the revolutions, if you know the pitch of the ball screw drive in there, will tell you the length of that. And when you know the length of that, and since you in theory know the length of that thing there, it will tell you what that angle is just by using some advanced trigonometry. Right. So what you need to do, and look, you get some slop here and here and here. So in other words, you get stack up area here, stack up area here, stack up area there. All those things have to be combined to kind of figure it out. So this is a bit trickier to be able to make sure you actually know the relationship. This is a lot easier because the actuator is actually the joint.
Yes.
This is the joint here. This is the actuator. They are different. It's more complicated. It's even worse when you get down here. Okay? You get to the same thing going. So you're inferring by the offset here what that angle is to give you an impression of where you are in space. So that's a very important, very first thing that you need to do. Now, it's one thing to be able to measure the encoders to say, I think I'm here, but which is here? It's a Cartesian position in space. Where do we get that Cartesian position in space? Well, we have to find some landmark on our hands. So when it's going on out there, it's looking at knuckles. I think what it was showing in the reality there is that it was looking at some spot on the hand here that it was able to identify as some kind of landmark. And then I also noticed it was like almost going for the ends here of the wrist, noticing like 2 points there that it says, I know where those are, and I'm using them as a reference. So finding anything, it's doing it, it's almost like a nerve where you are doing a three-dimensional projection. Now remember, the vision system up here, they've got 6 cameras in Optimus. So it can see a pretty wide field of view. And the idea of having a stereo eyes is that you can use that to basically survey where a point is in space. So if you have a stereo image, you can actually tell where the XYZ position is of a point in space. So the camera system is tracking something on the hand,
Right.
And because it's getting two images, you know, a left and a right image, it's able to say, oh, that's where that must be. And phones do this all the time. I mean, you have a lot of stuff on the phones that do that. You see the Apple phones able to do it. So let's say the technology for doing that has sort of been around to be able to track objects in space.
Right.
Using just your phone. And it's basically surveying. So if anyone's familiar with surveying, you know that what you do is that you have these two theodolites, which basically is a kind of a fancy protractor that allows you with a scope to look at some point in space. But to know where it is, the distance, you need two of them, and you need to know the distance between the two. And so they use something called a chain. I think a chain is like either 10 yards or 10 meters. I'm not sure what the international standard is. Probably the old English one was 10 meters. And because it's a chain made out of metal, it's like, it just doesn't stretch. So you put it out, you stick your two posts out there. Now you know the baseline distance. You take the theodolites, they look at each other, that gives a reference 0, and then you point at a common object in space, measure those angles, and now you triangulate. So just using the law of cosines, you're able to figure out what's the distance to that object along any one of those lengths. So Optimus is doing the same thing. The problem is, of course, when you do that, in order for the surveying to work, you have to know the length of your chain.
Right.
And so with our eyes, we have to know the length of the chain between our two eyes. Optimus has 6 cameras in there. So that means before they even do this trick, they have to calibrate the cameras in there, because I bet they're not identical either. So there's like different steps of calibration. So they will have a reference object that they know the dimensions of, and then you can like bring the camera system around there. It's like, look at all these things, and from it back what the error is in the camera system. Now we know where the camera system is. We have that replaced. Now we can look at the hands and we know exactly where we are.
And I'll interject with
the chain is 60 feet, by the way, or 4 poles. So it's 66 feet. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, if you've driven a car, the Tesla, for the first like hour or something, it goes like calibrating, because it's doing the same thing where I think it's looking around reference objects and making sure the cameras are where it thinks they are.
And the same thing with the cameras, because again, remember, you know, you've got the camera set up here that is placed somewhere on here. You have those cameras there, and you know, the B pillar camera, and you have some expectation of where they're going to be. But if they're not exactly where you're going to be, things are going to be off a little bit. So so the first thing is you've got to calibrate the eyes, and then you calibrate the rest of the body. Right. And once again, John, that was like a 2-minute video, and we've gone on already for 20 minutes about the first 20 seconds of the thing. So well,
I was going to say, let's move ahead, because let me show like the next step that they have in this process is exactly that motion, where you can see, like I left it right here, but as I play this forward, notice that the first thing it does is it's creating these little dots, which are obviously reference points.
Those are the reference points. Those
and then so it's identified those, and then the next step is it then creates a sort of like wireframe outline of the body. Like here's the, you know, the actuators up here, and
that's what it believes is the kinematic structure.
Right. So it's creating like a 3D version of itself. And you can even see it subtly down here at the bottom is its feet. So it knows where its feet are too. And remember that the head can't move. So these are wide angle cameras, and this is the view it's got, unless it bends the whole upper body down to look at this. And then once it does that, it then semantically segments out the scene, which is this sort of greenish teal color, whatever that color is. And it then, so it's going like, find landmarks, which are the little dots, then create a kind of wireframe outline, then semantically segment yourself from the outside world so you know where you are. It's basically where I am and where the rest of the world is. So that's that little process here. So let me just back it up here before. So here you've got, you know, it's looking, it's doing its calibration, finds the landmarks, finds the wireframe, semantically segments itself out. So very, very cool how that works.
Yes.
So,
yes. And now, the other thing to remember is it's not tracking just one point. It's looking for many points.
Right.
So the more points you have, the better accuracy you're going to get. Right. Every point is going to have a certain amount of accuracy. But if you actually oversample, which is what they're looking like they're doing, you can get very, very good accuracy out of it.
Yeah. And of course, look at it. It's got high contrast points. I mean, the places where the fingers attach to the hand is a high contrast. You know, that's an obvious point. You've got this wrist point, which is important because, like you were saying, wrist joints do not have direct angle measurements. So it's important to know where those are so you can calibrate that. And then, you know, there's one on the arm here. Obviously one's for the feet. There's one down here at the sort of forearm joint where it's got the third axis and all that
Right.
fun stuff.
Now,
So,
it's going to be tricky in how they do the calibration for the legs. Now, it seems like they probably have a certain series of movements they like to go through for the calibration for their arms.
right.
But then when they move down to the legs, the question is, do they balance on one leg without having been calibrated yet to look at the other one that's in front of you in that field of view? So that might be rather interesting. Or do they
Right.
sit down, or do they mount themselves on a stand while they kind of kick their legs up and look around and do these kind of motions? So
Right.
I have certain questions about that. And they also have to kind of do it with the torso, but eventually you can work it out. They might be using a neural net to do that, but more likely it's a heuristic.
Right.
So, and I think you would get better results with a heuristic anyway. So there
Yeah.
are known heuristics to be able to do this, to be able to come in and converge to what that answer is. Because you're starting with something that's pretty close anyway. If you're way off,
Right.
it's very hard to
Yeah,
accurate.
I think, you know, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel here. There's really good algorithms that do this kind of stuff already.
Yes,
So it's
yes,
probably using those algorithms. And
Mhm.
it's very careful to say once we've calibrated, then we can do this end-to-end neural network. So let's move forward to keep things cooking here, because we've gotten through 15 seconds so far. So now we get to the cool stuff. So once accurately calibrated, it learns various tasks more efficiently. So obviously that would make sense.
Yes.
And it's sorting these are not Legos. What are they called? Mega blocks or something? I can't remember.
Yeah, it looks like some kind of mega block. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway, but I was noticing something here with the fingers earlier when I was watching this. It kind of has like a grabbing motion that's the same every time. And what it does is, as it encounters the block with two fingers, the other fingers curl. So it's not dexterous in the sense you might think. What it's doing is just kind of closing its hand, and it forms around the shape of whatever object.
Yes, exactly. It's almost guessing. I have to close all my fingers.
Right.
And
So
I
right
wonder
there,
if eventually whether those fingers won't close. Now, it's hard for us to do it. If you try curling your fingers, it's really hard to keep those other fingers not curling.
yes,
It's difficult for you, but Optimus can do that. Optimus can just say, well, I'm just not going to actuate those two actuators, and I'll just be
Right.
able to get the other fingers to kind of pinch around. So that's kind of an expectation, is that they potentially could do it. So it's probably just saying, I'm trying to grab this thing, I'm going to do it. Now, some
Right.
other things that were pointed out here by Cern, which is very interesting, is that you'll notice this game of kind of cat and mouse that Optimus is playing with the humans.
Yes,
As
yes,
the human tries to annoy him by moving things around.
right,
And you brought up some very interesting things, which are going to be potentially emergent behavior from Optimus. So in one case, he wants, the goal is to get one of the greens or the blues over. And he's got a target. And sometimes that target suddenly moves. And the question is, does he then change to a different target, or does he go
Right.
after it? And when he goes after it very well. But
right,
I wonder if Optimus understands peekaboo. So if the human suddenly puts his hand over one of the blocks, so it can be seen, what is Optimus going to do at that point? Is Optimus going to assume it's disappeared, or is it going to kind of wait, or is it going to attempt to go underneath it? Now, this is the first thing. One of the big questions I'm going to have to Tesla on is, Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. The first law is, do not harm a human.
right,
So when the human is doing this little game, Optimus has to make sure not to hit the human. Now, the human is going to go over and try to grab the blue block away from Optimus.
right.
When that happens, you notice the hands get very, very close. And like Optimus almost stopped at that point because it's afraid it's going to hit the hand of the person.
Right.
And then it draws away. So it almost seems like Optimus drops the block a little bit sooner and then tries to get out of the way. Now, obviously, the human can do something like kind of come over and kind of grab his hand, and that's, well, it's not Optimus's fault. But
Right.
I'm wondering if the human operator just knows the limits of what to do to not get hit, or whether Optimus has that already built in.
Right.
So first question for everyone at Tesla AI and Optimus is the first law of robotics. How is Optimus making sure? Now, Optimus doesn't have a temper, but you and I know that if you are playing this game with me, at some point I'm going to get really mad. I'm going to punch you.
Yes, exactly. That's what well, I mean, this is this is the sorting equivalent of pushing the bot while it's walking. It's the same thing, just for sorting.
Yeah, it's the same
So-
thing. So you're playing, but you see, he's very patient. He doesn't care. And
Right.
he is able to redirect to a moving target very quickly. In one case, it looks like he completely changes targets. It's like,
Yes.
oh, I don't see it anymore. So again, the persistence model, when we play peekaboo, we know FSD when looking for pedestrians running around. If the pedestrian disappears, it doesn't assume the pedestrian isn't there anymore. It's like, it's behind this object. I better be aware that pedestrian might show up in a second or two.
Right.
So
right.
it's going to be interesting to see how things like that work.
So also, I just want to make a note, what I was talking about with the fist closing, you can see that pinky in this particular instance has curled around because it's missed,
Yes.
It picked up the block with the first
It's
three
missed.
things.
It's missed.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
anyway, yes. So I'm just going to rewind this right to the beginning of this so people can watch this. So it's sorting, and then the guy comes in and starts messing with it.
Yes,
so
right there.
That's a really good retargeting. That was a good retargeting.
Yes, the retargeting, but look at when he goes over to the blue side there and takes that away from him.
Yeah, let me
try to avoid being hit.
Right. And by the way, this is apparently one point.
All the axes are being used, all of those.
Right.
Except for the left arm approach. For some reason, the left arm is kind of disabled in this case, but the torso, the legs, everything, the hips are being involved in that motion.
Right.
So you get this fluidity.
And it is very fluid. I mean, it's using its entire body to do this. Oh, and then we get, of course, this is the thumbnail, by the way. I think I've already done the thumbnail and it says something like, can you do this? And I think there's a reasonable segment of the population of the people watching that would probably be like, I'm not positive I could do this myself.
John, switch the camera over. Switch the camera over here. Let's
okay,
see.
Hold on. Let's see. All right. Are you going to try to do it?
I'm going to try to do it. Let's see for a second here. I'm going to have Cern hold the camera and then we'll get the camera on him. Okay, so I think I'm on there. So what's the pause? Is it like this?
Yeah, with the hand straight out. Yeah. So see, that's not simple. Not simple.
Yeah, I mean, I lose my balance after a little bit. Can I do it on the other leg? One leg is better than the other. And then there's this one, right?
The tree pose. That's not tree pose. I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, yeah.
But it's some kind of
pose.
Yes.
Anyway,
and for a second, let's get Cern on screen here.
Yeah, Cern, come say hi.
He's probably not going to hear because I've got the earbuds in. But
hey, it's good to see you. Hey,
yeah, so he's also kind of pointed out in some of these things, so he should get the credit for what he's seen in the video.
So welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make sure I put his Twitter handle on in the description as well.
Absolutely, because he has the Cern model and he has also the Fumes model, the bots model, and then he worked with me to come up with the famous Scott model.
I don't know if I've seen the Scott model.
And I think we're working on a couple other models out there as well that will be rather interesting.
So let me go back to the sharing to do the poses, and then we can go back to the sorting, because I mean the poses are amazing, but also well, I mean they're very cool in their own right. But anyway, the sorting is, I think, the part that is the most interesting from a practical standpoint. But so anyway, you've got this motion, and you can see that this requires an immense coordination between all of the body parts because the center of gravity is shifting as he's moving. And I just noticed that even as it achieves this pose, so let me go back, it actually rockers on its foot a little bit. So watch the the left foot. Right. Yeah, see, it rockers itself into position.
Now go back at the very end.
1 second. Let's just finish this first, and then yep, yeah. So that's it. So anyway, it's
okay. So if you go back to that first one, when it kind of gets that stretched out position, it seems like everything locks, and then suddenly the leg that's planted on the ground moves a little bit.
Right.
And then there isn't any more compensation, because obviously the leg is going out there to counterbalance the fact that the arms and everything else is out there to get that balance point. And what would be interesting is you would think, well, wait a minute, when suddenly it shifts a little bit on the planted leg, why doesn't the rest of the body respond to it? And the reason is it doesn't have to, because you have the static margin where the center of gravity is over the center of the foot, which means you have a little bit of movement that you can stay stable without any other part of your body having to move. But it's only like that foot length, literally. So it was enough in there to be able to do it. And so that was like an interesting thing to kind of notice. And then, of course, the next one.
So wait, but just real quick, I want to take a look. So if you look at the ankle here, the center of mass is going to be straight over where the plant of the ankle is, which is a little bit more top heavy than a human. I do a lot of this work, and as a human, we would not be quite this far forward. So you can see that the torso is heavier than in a human being, because
remember the battery pack is in there.
Yeah, exactly, because it's a little bit more This is a little
So-
more forward than a human would be.
Yes, yes, and it's
so-
really got to get that leg in the back out.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So very
Yeah.
impressive. All right. So anyway, sorry, you were saying for the other
All
pose,
right.
I think it's the
Okay,
pose.
the other pose there. Now, the ankle, remember the ankle has 2 degrees of freedom. Do you have like the normal one for the toe off that we usually think of when we're walking? But you
Right.
also have kind of the side to side, which is more or less like twisting your ankle. When
Right.
you sprain your ankle, it's because you stepped on a Lego block on the floor that you didn't see, and your ankle kind of twists over to the side. And you
Right.
can sort of see that is that a very necessary kind of degree of freedom. And right here, we see that because in order to do that balance point, look at the ankle.
Yes.
The ankle is canted a little bit to, I guess, Optimus's left side there. Its
Right.
leg is not straight because
Yep.
that's what it has to do to get the balance. And then the torso is upright, but you're looking at that lower body.
Well,
That
but the torso
absolutely
is also
beautiful.
slightly bent the other direction too, which is
It's
very
probably a little bit. It's doing whatever it can to try to get that pose to be in the balance. But in order to do that, you need to use that particular degree of freedom in the ankle that you normally don't need on a flat surface.
right. And I think it's important to point out the sort of torque, the ability for the calf actuators and the hip actuators to be able to make this happen. These require like when you're standing on one leg, you're requiring twice as much potential torque and force to be able to maintain your balance as you would with with 2 legs on the ground. So yeah, it's impressive.
Now look at the range of motion on that knee. That's pretty good to be able to get that leg up that tight.
Right.
So that means it should be able to get down. Now the one question we haven't seen, we noticed what looks like knee pads on there. That I'm sure going through all this, Optimus has fallen. So the knees look a little bit funny. So it looks like they may have put some extra padding. It's different. We've seen.
Oh,
the covers
this little
are completely off.
Whatever it is, like a shield or something on the front.
Yes. It's different than the normal shield. The covers are all off. We can see the cabling that's all over there. So they're still fine tuning a lot of these things. But one of the questions I have is, have they taught Optimus how to fall? Because I notice when Atlas falls, Atlas just falls and just like accepts the fact that I'm falling down.
Right.
Whereas anyone who has gone to a climbing gym knows before they even allow you into the climbing gym, you have to show them that you know how to fall.
Right.
And that fall is getting into a tuck position to make sure you don't injure yourself. So I wonder if Optimus, when it senses that, whoa, I'm falling, whether it kind of pulls itself body in to do something. The other thing that would be interesting is to see Optimus on a trampoline. That's something that Cern kind of talked about, because if Optimus is able to go to a trampoline, it would begin to learn a little bit more about what it's like to free fall, to kind of pick up that and again, figure out what's the best way to fall so I don't injure myself or anyone else. The other is, along with falling, is we have not seen Optimus picking itself up from the floor yet.
Yes.
So we don't know, can it pick up an object from the floor in the first place?
Right.
Can it get down there enough and lean over without falling down? Does it know how to kind of like get down on one knee to be able to pick up something like that?
Right.
It seems like it's got enough movement, I think, in the knees that it can probably squat down and maybe pick something. I would like to see that. I want to see crawling. I want to see it being able to get up off the ground when it falls. I want to see what it does when it falls, whether it knows how to do that. So those would be some of the first things that I would be doing with the bot to make sure it can kind of protect itself and to get an idea of the range of motion.
Right.
But those yoga pauses are rather interesting. And and trust me, it's fallen down a couple of times. I'm sure.
It has. Well, I was just gonna note that it does not have a harness attached, a lead attached to its head. So it's this thing is flying without a net right now. So
which is interesting because they had it without the harnesses in the video that goes back to, I think, the shareholder day.
Yes.
But the top of the head was missing.
Yes.
As if they had just disconnected it like seconds before the videographer showed up, and then they're throwing it back on to make sure. So they were like, well, we're not sure how stable it is. But in that case, the head is always closed. It's almost like, oh, we're not even putting harnesses on this thing anymore because we're so confident.
Well, there's 2 things. Number one is that might indicate that they're very confident that it won't fall. But number 2, and more interesting, would be that they know that it can fall safely without hurting itself and can get back up again. If that's the case, then that's even better in a way, because that means they're like, we don't need a harness anymore, because if it falls over, it'll just pick itself up. It has a method to probably turn over onto its knees and then push up with its hands, and then probably, I would imagine something like that, some sort of standing motion like that. So
Yeah, so let's get the guy back there so we can sort of
Yeah.
see he's the star of the show for sure.
Yeah.
He's still not commenting. I can't get a comment out of him.
It is interesting to look at how different he looks than the one with all the wires sticking out. I mean, they're converging, but they're definitely not the same still by any means. So it's going to be a trick for Tesla to fit all of that wiring into that shape behind you, because if I do share screen again here, you'll be able to see just how much, sort of more volume all of the wiring currently and everything takes up than what you're seeing behind you. So so it is interesting.
And that's rather thick wiring as well.
Right. So I want to talk quickly about the brain here, because obviously we've got a lot of stuff going on with the mechanics of this guy, but this right here is all about, it said specifically end to end. Let's see, where does it say that? Neural nets run entirely on board using only vision. So, and then I think it says something else.
And I think the end to end was actually in the tweet itself.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was in the tweet. It said end to end. So basically this is version 12 full self-driving for Optimus. And again, they've got to come up with a better name for it. I hope they have an internal name. Full self-driving makes no sense for a robot. So, I mean, a humanoid robot.
Don't worry. Between Cern and I will come up with a clever outfit.
Okay, there we go. Come up with a clever name for them, and Tesla can steal it from you guys. But anyway, what's going on here is we talked all the way from the calibration that you talked about at the beginning to the sorting to the poses is it's taking in vision, and it's also taking in the IMU data. Everybody always cheats that, but it does have a balance system, and it has a feedback system about where its joints are from EMF, from the feedback and everything like that, the current feedback. It's got a lot of things besides vision, but basically it's taking all of these inputs in, and from that it's able to create a planning system, and then go from the strategic to the tactical, from the tactical to the control output, and output the controls. Weirdly enough, exactly the stuff we were talking about yesterday. But I think it's important for people to understand that the real magic here, there's a lot of magic going on hardware wise, and I don't want to take anything away from that, but the real magic here is the brains. This thing is once it calibrates itself, it's basically vision in to doing things out. And then it turns back to the thing we were talking about yesterday, which is how is it memorizing this stuff? Because clearly it knows how to do a sort task. So they are able to communicate with it, sort these objects. That's not the same thing as drive to the gym or the grocery store.
Right.
Because Google Maps basically gives you that answer. It's like, here's an A-star search algorithm. Here's where you're going to go. Make a left turn here, make a right turn here. So this is more complicated. I don't know how they're doing that. And that's really interesting. And that's what gets to our, hypothetical that it could be a large language model that's been sort of, integrated into this whole thing.
Right. Right. Now, John, I think I know what they should call it rather than FSD.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the Just Optimus Humanoid Neural Net.
Just Optimus. John. Oh, they're going to call it the John model. All right.
That's the John model. There we go. We got it. It's the John model.
I would be very, very happy if they called it that. That would be pretty cool. So there we go. I love it. I can't believe you just came up with that on the fly too. That's impressive. I had to think my way through that. I was like,
it's my superpower, the only one.
So I don't want to keep you too much longer, because I know they're opening their store at 10 o'clock, and you got in early, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, which is why you're hearing all the vacuuming around here, because
sorry, it's apologies.
I mean, I was kidding earlier that we broke into the joint, and we're getting ready to steal Optimus, and but unfortunately the auto summon for my Model Y, it wasn't quite working. It wouldn't come into the mall, so. So we're gonna have to leave Optimus here.
Did you see? I saw a picture of I think it was a Model Y, or I don't know. It drove right through a brick wall. I was like, damn.
Oh,
I mean, obviously somebody
it must. I don't know how they get this thing in here. I mean, it's like, it doesn't look like it fits through those doors. So they must be driving these things through brick walls as well. I don't know.
They figured out quantum teleportation. That's
they figured out some way to be able to fit them in there. It doesn't look like it goes to the door. That's the anti-theft. There's no way you can steal these things. It doesn't fit through the door.
How are you going to get through there? So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for taking time out of your incredibly busy day to talk about this with us. I'm sure there will be more things for us to discover as we look at this even more, but this is a...
There's going to be a video tomorrow and the day after. Believe me, we're going to milk this one for all it's worth. There's a lot of subtle points. It'll be a little bit easier when I get home and be able to do a bit more hand waving and everything else.
Right.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and definitely check out Cern's Twitter and Scott's Twitter and all of that good stuff. And we will see you in the next video, which will probably be soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye now.